Hey everybody, Howard Gearhauser here alongside my dad, Dr. Richard Gearhauser. In today's video episode, we are going to talk about smartphone addiction. Now, there's some new studies showing that smartphone addiction is actually very similar to other addictions in terms of what it does to the brain. Our longing to have our smartphone can be similar to an addiction to drugs and like needing that drug. So there's a lot of evidence showing that this smartphone addiction literally has a chemical, emotional effect on our body. So we wanted to dive into that. As we've discussed in other videos as well, smartphones have other health concerns, such as electromagnetic fields and artificial light, which can disrupt our circadian rhythm and prevent our cells from repairing. So there's already issues with it, but now when we combine that with addiction, this can be a serious problem. So let's talk about the addiction side of this first, Dad. Can you tell us a little bit more about the science behind smartphone addiction and how that relates to other addictions that might be more well known?
Okay, well, in psychiatry, so psychiatry is kind of in the realm of the diagnosis of addiction, things like bipolar depression or schizophrenia, things like that. The DSM-5, that's the fifth version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for mental disorders. So mental disorders are kind of, in psychiatry, they kind of vote. They get an expert panel and they all vote on the disease, and if it gets enough votes, then it goes in this manual. It's not too scientific, but today we're going to look at the science on, is there hard evidence that there really is such a thing as a smartphone addiction? So back in around 2013, I believe, I'm not sure, don't hold me to that, but quite a few years back, they developed an inventory like they do with other addictions, an inventory of asking a bunch of questions, and then they try to validate, does this questionnaire really pick up those people that their use of the smartphone is harming them either physically or mentally or both. So they came up with this questionnaire, the smartphone addiction inventory. So they came up with that. And there is a similar thing that's already in the DSM-5, and that is the internet gaming disorder, where people get addicted to playing games on the internet. And so that's already in there. The smartphone addiction is not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual yet, but surveying people with that inventory to diagnose them with the possibility of having a smartphone addiction, it was found that in different studies, it's different percentages, but anywhere from 12 to 28% of the population actually has this condition. And it's more prevalent in students. So younger people that are still in school, there's a higher prevalence in those groups. So addiction, typically we don't think of as a good thing. So they have this inventory and it asks questions like, how many times have you run into a light pole because you were looking at your cell phone in the last week? And if it's greater than 17, then, you probably have a smartphone addiction. So it asks these questions that relate like, do you stop, do you not ever look in the eye of your friend because you're constantly looking at the cell phone screen? You gotta look at your friend. So eye-to-eye contact. You need the smartphone. Or if you feel unhappy because you left your smartphone at home and you start having the shakes, the deuterium tremors, which is the alcohol, which is another addiction people can have. So the addiction seems to be real, but what we know is from previous studies as far as looking directly at the brain physically, what happens with other addictions is certain areas, and there's a test of the brain called an MRI where they image the brain, and what the MRI does is it sends a magnetic field across the brain tissue, and what that does there's an atom that has orbiting electrons in it, and when it gets in the magnetic field, the electron bumps up an orbital, and that has to do with quantum physics, and obviously we're into quantum stuff. But when you release the magnetic field, when that electron drops back down into its previous orbital, when it does that, it gives off a photon. So the energy of being at that higher orbital, when it comes back to the lower orbital, it releases a photon, and they have a camera there that picks it up, and that's the MRI picture. And then there's a functional MRI, which not only looks at the anatomy with the picture, but it also looks at the metabolism of the different areas of the brain. And what they found is that the smartphone addiction, in a small pilot study of like 25 people that scored the addiction level on that inventory versus 25 people who didn't, it scored that they weren't addicted, and they compared the size of different areas of the brain. And what they found was this one part of the brain, or several parts of the brain, were smaller in the smartphone addicted people versus the non-addicted people. And it's interesting, this area of the brain is important for self-awareness, for emotional regulation. The insula, another area of the brain that shows effects, has to do with like craving and drug seeking behavior. So there's not much doubt that this is real. This is really an addiction. It's a huge percentage of the population. So it means that there's millions of people out there in this boat, and it might be you. And so we want you to be aware. There are areas of your brain that are shrinking, and these areas of your brain may lead to dysfunction and unhappiness in your life. And we want people to be aware. And besides the other things Howard mentioned, that these give off blue light, which can damage our retina and disrupts our circadian rhythm. Plus, they give off electromagnetic fields, which do a whole series of chemical effects and really quantum effects in our molecules and in our atoms and electrons that increase inflammation. And they've shown they damage sperm, they cause tumors in animals. All these things are proven with these very low level radio frequency waves, which the cell phone radiation is radio frequency waves, have an effect on biology. And that's because all of our cells communicate with electromagnetic and also vibrational waves. It's just how life works.
And we have a video on 7 steps for safe cell phone use. So after this one, you should probably go check that out if you want to figure out how you can use your smartphone in a safe way, and also pass this along to your loved ones who may be using smartphones, especially if you have young children. It's really important that you start incorporating some of these techniques. Now, to take a step back, talking about the self-awareness and also the emotional regulation. In some of our videos, we talk about this idea of subconscious programming and the matrix, meaning that when we live in a place of fear and lack of self-awareness, and we're not able to understand where we are energetically, that can be problematic, because then we're very susceptible to the programming on our smartphone. So when we're addicted to the smartphone and to social media, and we're getting this programming on and on and on, that's keeping us in the feelings of fear, lack, competition and comparison, judgment, etc. And we don't even know that because we don't have that emotional regulation within us. That's problematic. And that's why, as my dad mentioned, this can actually lead to depression as well. So it's important to take a break from the smartphones. It's important to get out of this addiction. Now, one of the things is, if we think of smartphones as just being something we're addicted to, as opposed to replacing it with something that makes us feel good, then it's just like we're quitting something we like and not replacing it with something else. So remember, connecting with nature, getting your circadian rhythm back in check, all of these different things is really important to break that addiction and replace it with something that puts you in an elevated emotion, a heart emotion of love, peace, bliss, joy, happiness, etc. Is there anything you want to add to that, Dad?
I think that is key. Is the matrix that we talk about, which is the unconscious programming that goes on today, and especially with the electronic media, but it happens a lot of ways with society and culture and religion, and all these different things are programming us, and then we start acting out. We start living our lives via a program, and that's the matrix. Think of the movie. Everything was programmed to go a certain way. So here, the cell phone companies, some of the biggest corporations out there, of course, they want you addicted to the cell phone. The more cell phones they can sell, the better. They're into expanding this, and it's self-evident that they don't care how much it hurts people, because they don't even look or acknowledge the studies that show they cause biologic harm. These companies don't look at it, and neither does the Federal Communications Commission. So we're kind of on our own. We need to become aware of how we're programmed. So we're programmed to think the cell phone, the smartphone is great, and it is great in a lot of ways. I mean, yes, you're probably watching me on your smartphone. So I'm not saying it's all bad, but I would say if you are following someone else's program and you are completely unaware of it, that is not good. No one is going to think that is good. And I believe that's what's happening.
And a big part of the smartphone thing, as I kind of mentioned, is the social media use. That's one of the big reasons we're on our smartphones so much, is kind of checking in on everyone and seeing what they're doing. Go check out the video on how to clean up your social media so you can feel good. That's a really important video too, because if you're going to use social media and you're not necessarily ready to break the addiction, you're going to want to make sure that you're following things that can still emotionally uplift you and get you to a place where you're feeling, positive vibrations, I guess you could say, and not following accounts that keep you in that judgment zone. So go check out that video too. If social media is kind of one of the main reasons you're using your smartphone, you'll want to see that, just to give you some tips on how you can clean that up and make things like YouTube or Instagram things that are a little more uplifting for you. Now, like my dad mentioned, you're probably watching us on a smartphone. Maybe you're on your computer at home. We like to think that we're an account that's worth following and that we've earned your trust. But if you really don't feel that way, I would recommend unfollowing us too, if we're bringing you down. So just do that inventory as well. That way, for the times you do use your phone, you can use it in a beneficial way. Like my dad said, it's not all bad. It's just when you're so addicted to it that you can't even look someone in the eye and you can't even have a conversation. And with our youngest generation, there's major social anxiety and issues like building friendships and whatnot. This is something you're going to want to pass and institute in your own family if you have kids. That way, they can live a happy life. That's the whole point here. So anything you want to add before we sign off on this one?
I think you're right in that you could take this as another negative and another stressor I'm putting on you. Oh God, my smartphone's killing me. It's shrinking parts of my brain. And, I mentioned the insula, and then there's the anterior cingulate nucleus and different things that are shrinking and they're subfunctioning. But here is one of the keys to mitigate this, and this is to see the sunlight in your eyes while you're barefoot, preferably out in nature, a really simple thing. And if you just did that, you would have more joy in your life. So I took away all the negative, more joy just from doing that simple thing, grounding to the earth, getting the sunlight in your eyes and on your skin, and maybe at the same time doing a little meditation.
Yeah, sorry, car going by. That's great advice. In another video that we actually go through 10 of our best protocols for making you feel good. You should go check that one out. That's called 10 cutting edge health protocols that your doctor will never tell you about. That video is amazing because it gives you 10 practical things that you can do to just elevate your emotion, get yourself feeling really, really good, and start replacing some of those things that are dragging you down. Go check that one out too. And we will see you guys on the next video. Thanks, Dad.
See ya.
See ya.